"Ma'am, back behind the line. This is a parade deck, not a school pickup. I don't know what you think you're doing up here, but this is no place for nobodies. So let's move it along before you embarrass that boy." The man saying it wore pressed camis and a campaign cover pulled low over his eyes, and he leaned into her space, the way young men lean when they are sure the world is watching them be in charge. His name was Staff Sergeant Travis Boyd. He was 28 years old, a senior drill instructor in the 3rd week of his last training cycle, and he had decided, in the space of one glance, that the woman in the plain red blouse at the family rope was a problem he could solve in front of an audience. She did not step back, and she did not look away from the colors. She simply let the words land and fall, the way a stone wall lets rain run off it. The morning was bright and clean over the Marine Corps recruit depot. The parade deck stretched wide and pale in the early light, ranks of new Marines forming up in the distance in their dress uniforms, the reviewing stand draped and waiting, the national ensign and the unit colors hanging in the still air before the wind found them, families crowded 3 deep at the ropes, mothers with phones already raised, fathers in good shirts, small children on shoulders. Somewhere in the forming platoons was a 19-year-old named Owen, and the woman's eyes found him once, held for a single beat, and then returned to the colors. Boyd waited for her to apologize, or to argue, or to do any of the things civilians did when he used that voice. She did none of them. She stood with her heels together and her chin level, and her hands settled quietly at her sides, and she watched the flag with an attention that had nothing nervous in it. 20 feet away, Gunnery Sergeant Leon Hadley slowed down. Hadley was 35 and had been on the drill field for 11 years, and in 11 years, he had learned the difference between people who stood still and people who stood at attention. The woman in the red blouse was doing the second one, and she did not seem to know it. When the color guard shifted and the ensign stirred, her posture changed a fraction of an inch, heels closing the last half inch, shoulders dropping back, weight centering, a reflex older than thought. Civilians did not do that. Civilians fidgeted and craned and checked their phones. This woman had come to a kind of rest that took years to build. He filed it, the way he filed everything, and kept his face flat. Boyd, satisfied that he had handled it, turned half around to be sure his platoon had seen him handle it. A few of the new Marines were watching, and a couple of the other drill instructors, and that was the whole point. He gave the woman one more look, the look a man gives a thing he has finished with. "Stay put," he said. "Some of us actually earned the right to stand up here." "All right," she said. 2 words, even and unhurried, and they should have been nothing. But there was no give in them and no fear in them, and for just a moment Boyd felt the strangeness of having pushed against something that did not push back and did not move either. He frowned, decided it was nothing, and walked back toward his recruits with his chest out. Hadley stayed where he was. He looked at the woman again, at the calm, at the way she had answered an insult by standing straighter, at the plain red blouse and the plain slacks, and the small canvas tote on the rope rail in front of her, squared, somehow, exactly to the line. She did not look like anyone. That was the thing that began, very quietly, to bother him. In his experience, the people who worked hardest to look like no one at all were almost never no one at all. The loudspeakers crackled, and a voice welcomed the families and asked them to find their places. The forming platoons stiffened. Out on the deck, the day's machinery began to turn. The slow, exact, beautiful machinery of a graduation, every movement of it built and rehearsed and inherited across 2.5 centuries. The woman in the red blouse watched it begin and let out a slow breath, and something in the set of her shoulders said she wasn't seeing a ceremony at all. She was seeing all the decks she had ever stood on, stacked up behind this one like cards. Boyd had already forgotten her. Hadley had not. He moved a step closer to the rope, no longer idle. a senior man with 11 years of reading people, and the first cold itch of a question he could not yet name. The woman the staff sergeant had just called a nobody stood quietly in the morning light, and the gunnery sergeant began, slowly, to suspect she was something else entirely. The ceremony's small machinery gave her away before the big machinery ever could. A young family had wedged in beside her at the rope, a flustered mother, a father bouncing a toddler, a grandmother fanning herself, and they didn't understand any of it. When would the recruits be released? Where did the families wait afterward? Which ones out there were even theirs? The mother turned, a little desperate, to the calm woman in red, who seemed to be the only person nearby, not also confused. "Excuse me, do you know how this works? When do they actually, finish?" "They'll pass in review first," the woman said. "The platoons march past the reviewing stand in order, by the guidon. That's the small flag at the front of each one. Then the commander reports the class. There are a few remarks, and then the senior drill instructors dismiss them. After the dismissal, you'll have about an hour with him before he has to clear the area." "How do you even know all that?" "I've stood on a few parade decks," the woman said, and smiled, and left it there. The mother thanked her and turned back to the field, comforted, and never thought about it again. But Hadley, drifting along the rope with his hands behind his back, had heard the whole thing, and he had heard the words underneath the words. Passing in review. The guidon reports the class. Senior drill instructors dismiss them. Those were not pamphlet words. Those were not the things a parent picked up from a welcome video. They were the right words, in the right order, said by someone who had said them 100 times and stopped noticing she knew them. He stepped near a junior drill instructor and spoke low, without moving his lips much. That woman just called that passing in review and named the guidon before it was on the field. Keep an eye on the rope. Be polite about it. "Roger, Gunny." It was a small thing, the kind of small thing nobody but a drill instructor would notice, and it sat in Hadley's chest and would not settle. He had spent more than a decade teaching civilians' children to become Marines, and in that decade, he had met every kind of parent there was. He had met the proud ones and the frightened ones, the ones who cried and the ones who could not stop filming, the fathers who had served and wanted everyone to know it, and the mothers who had never been near a base in their lives. He had never once met a parent who came to rest at a flag the way this woman came to rest at a flag. Without thinking, without performing, the stillness arriving in her the way a tide arrives, on a schedule older than the day. There was a whole life behind a stillness like that, and Hadley found he very much wanted to know what it was. The wind came up at last and unrolled the colors, and the woman's eyes went to them again, automatically, the way a sailor's eyes go to the horizon. She found her son's platoon in the long line, and her face did a small, private thing. Pride held carefully behind discipline, the way you hold a candle out of the wind. Then Boyd came back. He had circled his platoon, checked his guidon bearer, and found, to his irritation, that the nobody in the red blouse was still at the rope and now apparently holding court. That was worse, somehow, than her arguing. He came down the line with his jaw set. "Let me guess," he said, loud enough for the families to hear. "You read a pamphlet. Watched a couple videos. Now you think knowing a few words makes this your house." "No," she said. "It doesn't. You're a guest here. Barely that. There are people who spent years earning the right to stand on that deck, and there are people who wandered up to a rope and started talking like they belong. Don't confuse yourself for the first kind." She looked at him then, fully, for the first time. A level, unhurried look that took him in the way a range officer takes in a new shooter, cataloging the grip, the stance, the bad habits. "I won't," she said. 2 words again. His paragraph, her sentence. And the strange thing, the thing Boyd could not have explained, was that her 2 words made his whole speech feel smaller, the way a quiet answer in a loud room makes the loud man hear himself. He opened his mouth to fix it and found he had nothing to fix it with. Hadley watched the exchange and felt the itch sharpen into something closer to certainty. He had seen officers dress down men with less authority than this woman had just put into the word, won't. He had seen sergeants major say more with a held silence. Whatever she was not what the staff sergeant thought, and the staff sergeant was building himself a very tall ladder, with no idea what was underneath it. The gunnery sergeant stepped closer to the rope, no longer pretending to be idle. He did not yet know who she was. He only knew, now, with the flat certainty of a man who had spent his life reading people, that Staff Sergeant Boyd was making a mistake he would remember for the rest of his career. He just did not know how large a mistake. Not yet. It got worse the way these things always get worse. Socially, with an audience, one man performing for the next. 2 more drill instructors drifted over to see what Boyd was working on, and a cocky young sergeant from another series tagged along, and all at once the woman in the red blouse was not a person at the rope, but a bit, a thing for 4 men to be funny around while they waited for the ceremony to start. "Boys," Boyd said, sweeping a hand at her like a tour guide. "Meet the parade deck expert. Knows all the words. Real operator, this one. Probably ran recon back in the day." They laughed, because he was senior and it was expected, and because laughing at the quiet woman cost them nothing. One of them gave her a nickname, the Expert, and it stuck the way cruel, small names stick. The young sergeant showing off knocked her canvas tote off the rope rail with the back of his hand and let it drop into the dirt, and they laughed again at that. She bent, lifted the bag, set it back on the rail, and squared it to the line. And squaring it to the line was the tell none of them read. She did not glare. She did not snap. She set the bag down precisely parallel to the rope, the way you dress a row of gear for inspection, and her hands did it without being asked, and she straightened back up with the same unbothered calm she had worn the whole morning. There was a reason for the calm, though none of the 4 men could have guessed it. She had been spoken to like this before, in worse places, by men with far more to back it up. She had been doubted by foreign colonels, and second-guessed by her own hire and dismissed, early in her career, by people who could not get past the fact of her until the work made them. She had learned, somewhere along the way, that the only answer to being underestimated that ever held up was to keep doing the job until the truth arrived on its own. The truth always arrived. You did not have to drag it. You only had to outlast the people who could not see it, yet. So she stood at the rope and let 4 young men decide who she was, and she felt nothing about it at all, because she knew something they did not, which was how this kind of morning ended. "You're not even mad," Boyd said, half delighted, half unsettled. "That's almost sad. You know what your problem is. You think being quiet makes you tough. Out here, quiet just means nobody's noticed you yet." "Maybe," she said. He wanted more than that. He wanted to be argued with, because an argument he could win. Instead, he got 1 word, and 1 word made him reach for the only card in his hand that always made him feel large. "You know what? It doesn't matter," he said, turning to his audience as much as to her. "After this cycle, I'm gone, off the drill field. I've got orders, assessment and selection." He let it sit, watching their faces, and got the reaction he wanted, a low whistle, a couple of raised eyebrows. "That's right. The Raiders, the hardest door in the Corps. So, while you people stand at a rope and watch a parade, I'm going to go be one of the quiet professionals for real. Believe me, ma'am, I know exactly what kind of person belongs in something like that. And what kind doesn't? It's my whole job to know. And you? He looked her up and down, slow for the crowd. You're the second kind. He could not have known he was describing the woman in front of him. He could not have known that her name was already printed on the orders he was so proud of, down at the bottom, on the line that says, "Who you report to." She said nothing at all. She only looked at him with that level, patient attention, and for one strange second, Boyd had the feeling of a man who has thrown a punch into fog and felt his fist keep going. Off to the side, Hadley's eyes had dropped to the woman's wrist. When she had set the bag back on the rail, her sleeve had shifted, and there was something there, faded, old, half-hidden, that the gunnery sergeant could not quite make out from where he stood. He took a step. The colors snapped overhead. The loudspeaker called the families to their places, and the great machinery of the morning began at last to move in earnest. If you have ever watched a loud man brag about a door the quiet woman beside him already owns, stay with this one and subscribe to the Veteran Vault, because what happens when that door opens is the whole reason this story is worth your time. It stopped being a joke when the families began to move. As the ceremony came up to its first turn, the crowd at the ropes pressed forward, parents jockeying for the angle that would let them see their Marine pass. The woman in red stepped forward with them, the most natural thing in the world, a mother trying to see her son. And Boyd, who had decided she was his to manage, planted himself in front of her and put his hand up flat. "Not you," he said. "You stay back." "My son is in the 3rd platoon," she said. "I'd like to see him pass." "I'm sure you would. You stay back anyway. I don't trust people who think the rules bend for them, and you've been bending them all morning." It was a small thing, and a large thing at once. Around her, other parents flowed forward unchecked. She alone had been singled out of a moving crowd, and pinned in place by a man who had decided she was a problem, and the families near her felt the wrongness of it, and did what crowds do, found something else to look at. She stepped to go around him. Boyd caught her by the upper arm. He meant it as a steer, a firm civilian handling grip, the kind he used on confused parents and lost contractors. He gripped her arm and pulled her backward, jarring her half a step, and the casual violence of it, a young man's hand closing hard on a woman's arm in front of a crowd that looked away, was the line, crossed, from words into hands. Her arm did not yield, and it did not fight. It simply became, under his hand, like gripping a mooring cleat, a thing with no give in it at all. And for half a second, Boyd felt the dense, trained solidity of the arm he was holding, and did not understand what he was feeling. People's arms were soft. This was not soft. This was something braced and rooted and entirely unbothered by his strength. And as he gripped her, her sleeve rode up. On the inside of her wrist, faded and old, ink gone soft and blue-gray with the years, was a small tattoo, a slim dagger, point down, crossed through a sprig of laurel, a stiletto, a fighting knife, drawn the particular way one community of men and women drew it. A Marine standing 2 feet away saw it and frowned and could not place it. Hadley saw it and placed it instantly, and went very still. "That's a Raider dagger," he said under his breath, to no one. He knew that mark. Every man on the drill field knew that mark, the way you know a thing you are not part of, but have learned to respect from a distance. Marine Raiders, Marine Special Operations. The quiet professionals Boyd had just bragged about joining. It was on the inside of the wrist of the woman the staff sergeant was holding by the arm and calling a nobody, and it was old, worn in, the tattoo of someone who had carried it for 15 or 20 years. Out on the deck, the 1st platoon stepped off into the pass in review, and the crowd roared, and the woman in red turned her head to track the 3rd platoon coming up behind it. Still trying, even held, even handled, to see her son cross. Her eyes were not on Boyd at all. He had stopped existing for her. There was only the formation, and the boy in it, and the day she had flown across the country to give him. Hadley did not move toward her. He turned and moved, fast and controlled, toward the reviewing stand, where the senior leadership of the day sat in their dress blues, with their ribbons bright in the morning sun. The watcher was not going to argue with a staff sergeant who would not listen. He was going to go get someone whose word could not be ignored, or to confirm, from a man who would know, the thing he was now almost certain of. Behind him, Boyd kept his grip on the arm of a Navy Cross recipient and explained to her, again, that she did not belong. Hadley crossed the back of the parade deck at the walk that senior men use when they want to run and will not let themselves, and came up on the right side of the reviewing stand, where the Sergeant Major stood. Sergeant Major Ezra Holt was 48 years old and had spent 29 of those years in the Marine Corps, and there was very little left on a parade deck that could surprise him. He saw Hadley coming and read his face before he reached him. "Gunny. Sergeant Major." Hadley kept his voice down and his eyes forward, the way you do when you do not want a crowd to know anything is happening. "I've got a situation at the family rope. Staff Sergeant Boyd's been riding a woman in a red blouse all morning. Civilian, we thought. Now he's got hands on her." "Hands on her?" "Gripping her arm, steering her. But that's not why I came." Hadley breathed once. "Sergeant Major, she's not a civilian. She stands at attention without knowing she's doing it. She named the pass in review and the guidon before they were on the deck. And when her sleeve came up just now, she's got a Raider dagger on the inside of her wrist. Old ink. 20 years, easy." Holt's eyes, which had been on the formations, came around slowly. "Red blouse, at the family rope. Gunny, describe her again. The face, the build. How does she carry it? Mid-40s, maybe. Lean. Quiet. Carries it like a senior officer who's decided to be invisible today. Doesn't rattle. Boyd's been escalating for an hour, and she hasn't given him 1 inch of reaction." Holt's eyes moved to the reviewing stand, where the day's reviewing officer sat at the center of the row, and something in the Sergeant Major's face changed. A kind of careful, lengthening attention, like a man hearing a name he has not heard in years, and waiting to be sure he heard it right. The reviewing officer was a brigadier general named Desmond Falk. Before he wore a star, Falk had commanded the Marine Raider Regiment, and Holt had been a sergeant major in that regiment. And there was a name out of those years that the two of them did not say lightly. A company commander turned battalion commander. A woman who had done a thing on a rooftop overseas that the regiment still taught, quietly, to its own. A call sign that the operator said the way you say a word you respect. "Sergeant Major?" Hadley said. "You know her." "I think the general knows her better," Holt said softly. "Stand by, Gunny. Do not let Boyd do one more thing to that woman. Not one thing. If he so much as raises his voice at her again, you put your body between them, and you take whatever comes. Do you understand me?" "Aye, Sergeant Major." Holt turned toward the reviewing stand. Hadley turned back toward the rope, where Boyd, oblivious, had still not let go. What the boy in the campaign cover did not know, what he could not have known, holding the arm of a quiet woman and calling her a guest, was that the next few minutes were about to teach him the most expensive lesson of his life. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault, so you do not miss the moment it lands. The people on the parade deck could not see the thing that made Susie Stahl who she was. Only the audience can see it. It happened 9 years before the morning of the graduation, on a rooftop on the other side of the world, and it never left her. She was 33 years old then, a major, and she had a team in a city that had gone bad around them. The target had been a quiet one, in and out before dawn, lift a man who needed lifting, gone before the streets woke. It had not stayed quiet. Somewhere between the breach and the bag, the whole block lit up, and the exfil route they had walked in on was suddenly a corridor of muzzle flash, and her team was strung out across open ground with wounded and nowhere good to go. She put herself on a rooftop alone. It was the only piece of high ground that covered the street her team had to cross, and somebody had to hold it, and she did not ask anyone else to. For 11 minutes, she was the only thing between her people and the open ground, and she made those 11 minutes cost everything they could be made to cost. She was 33 years old, and for 11 minutes, she was a wall. When the worst of it broke, she came down off the roof and went into the street for the wounded. There were 2 who could not move themselves. She brought them out one at a time, across the open, under fire, and she did not leave either of them in the road for 1 second longer than it took to come back for the next. Her people would say afterward that she moved through that street like the rounds were someone else's problem, and that this was not courage exactly. Courage has fear in it, but something stranger and quieter, a total economy of motion, a woman doing a job with the volume turned all the way off. And then she went back a 3rd time for Mateo Rios. Sergeant Mateo Rios was her team sergeant, 27 years old, the steadiest man she had ever served with, and he was pinned at the far end of the street and hit and still calling corrections to his Marines over the net, like the hole in him was a paperwork problem. She reached him. She got a hand into his gear and got him moving, the 2 of them low and fast along the wall. "Go, ma'am. Go," Rios said. "Don't you carry me and lose the rest of them." "Stop talking, Sergeant," she said. "That's an order." She carried him anyway, the last 40 yards, with everything she had. It did not matter. Some loads you carry knowing the distance is already too long, and you carry them anyway, because the alternative is to set a man down in a street and become someone who sets men down in streets. She got him to cover. She did everything there was to do, with her own hands, and then with the corpsman's, and then with both of theirs together. And none of it was enough, because some wounds do not negotiate. He died with his hand in hers a few minutes later, still trying, at the very end, to tell her his Marines were all accounted for. They were. Every one of them. Because she had been the wall. She carried 2 things out of that street that did not show on any record. The first was the exact weight of him across her shoulders in the last 40 yards. A weight she could still summon 9 years later, standing at a rope in the sunshine, the way you can summon a smell or a song. The second was the silence afterward, in the dark, when the team came down off its adrenaline, and nobody could look at her, because she had done everything right, and a good man was dead anyway, and there was no lesson in it, no clean meaning, nothing to make it sit easy. She had learned that night that you do not get to choose whether the worst things mean anything. You only get to choose what you do with the carrying. And she had decided, somewhere in that dark, that she would carry it quietly, and that she would never again let anyone she led believe that the quiet ones felt nothing. The quiet ones felt all of it. The quiet was the only way to keep standing under the weight. In the after-action, and in the long machinery of the award that followed, the name stuck to her the way names stick after a night like that. Blackjack, a card that wins quiet and wins hard. And a year later, a man with stars on his shoulders pinned the Navy Cross to a woman who would have traded it without a single blink to have Mateo Rios walking around somewhere, being insufferable about his fitness scores. She put the medal in a drawer. She went back to work. The valor never needed to shout. That was the thing the loud men never understood about the quiet ones. She did not tell the story at parties. She did not wear it on a hat. Almost no one outside the teams ever knew her face, and that was exactly how she wanted it, because the medal had a weight, and the weight had a name, and the name was Rios, and you do not put a thing like that on a ball cap. 9 years later, she stood at a rope at her son's graduation, with that whole street folded up quietly behind her eyes, and let a boy in a campaign cover call her a nobody, because the day was not about the street. The day was about Owen. She had decided that on the plane. Whatever happened at the rope, she wasn't going to let it be about her. The flashback closes the way it always closes for her, on a single name, carried forward out of that street and into the present, the same name that will end this story at a wall of cut stone. Mateo Rios. She blinked, and she was at the rope again, and Boyd's hand was on her arm. Boyd went one step too far, the way men like Boyd always do, right at the moment the world was turning under his feet. The graduating Marines were passing in review now, platoon after platoon swinging past the reviewing stand in their dress blues, and the family surged against the ropes, and the third platoon was coming. Owen's platoon. The woman in red leaned to see, every cell in her bent toward the boy about to cross the most important 40 yards of his young life, and Boyd stepped into her line and blocked it. "I told you," he said. "This is no place for nobodies. You'll watch the video later like everybody else who didn't earn the deck." For one breath, the calm went out of her eyes, and something flat and very old looked out instead. The look the men on that rooftop had followed into the open. The look that had nothing in it but the next thing that had to be done. It was there, and then it was gone, put away by an act of will the size of a building, because the boy crossing the deck was hers, and the day was his, and she would not make it about her. She stepped again to see her son. Boyd seized her arm, hard this time, no pretense of steering, and yanked her back a full step, jarring her, his fingers digging in, his voice dropping to the flat, private nastiness of a man who has decided to win. "You're done here," he said. "I don't care who you think you are." And there it was, the line, fully crossed. A drill instructor with his hand clamped on the arm of a Navy Cross recipient, wrenching her away from the sight of her own son becoming a Marine, in front of a crowd that had decided not to see it. She did not break his grip. Everyone who could read her now. Hadley hurrying back. Holt halfway to the general. 2 old Marines in the crowd who had felt the temperature change without knowing why. Every one of them knew, with absolute certainty, that she could have. That the arm in Boyd's hand could have come free in any of a dozen ways, fast and final, and that the only reason it had not was that the woman it belonged to had chosen stillness over the easy answer one more time. She turned her head, slowly, and looked at him. "Take your hand off me, Staff Sergeant," she said. Her voice was very quiet and very level, and it carried the way quiet things carry when everything around them has gone tense. "I won't ask again, and you don't want me to make you." It was not a threat. That was the terrible thing about it, the thing that made the Marine standing nearest go cold. A threat has heat in it. This had none. This was a statement of fact, delivered by someone who knew precisely what she was capable of and was telling him, as a courtesy, to spare them both the demonstration. The old Marine in the crowd, a man in his 70s in a faded unit ball cap, here for some other family's son, had gone very quiet, and he reached out without looking and put a hand on his grandson's chest and eased the boy back a step, the way you ease someone back from the edge of a platform when a train is coming. He did not know who the woman was. He knew only what he had heard in her voice, which was a thing he had heard exactly twice in his own long life, both times from men who had then done something he never forgot. He took his hat off, slowly, though he could not yet have said why. Boyd, deaf to every signal the universe was sending him, tightened his grip. Behind him, Hadley broke into a near run. At the reviewing stand, Sergeant Major Holt reached the general's chair and bent and said 3 quiet words, and the families in the front rows heard the scrape of a chair on the platform as Brigadier General Desmond Falk stood up. The whole deck did not know it yet, but it was about to. The trigger fired all at once, the way it always does, too fast for the man it lands on to get out of the way. Brigadier General Desmond Falk came down off the reviewing stand. He was 52 years old, a lean, weathered man with a single star on each collar, and he crossed the back of the parade deck at a pace that made aides scramble and heads turn, and he did not slow down until he reached the family rope. He stopped at a precise distance from the woman in the red blouse, the correct distance, the respectful distance, and for a moment, the Brigadier General just looked at her, and his face did something the families had never seen on a general's face. It went soft with recognition, and then it went still with respect. "Colonel Stahl," he said. The words dropped into the noise of the crowd, and the noise seemed to thin around them. "Blackjack." Falk's voice was not loud, but it reached. "I'd know you on any deck in the world. It is an honor, ma'am." And then a Brigadier General of the United States Marine Corps brought his right hand up in a slow, deliberate salute to a woman in a civilian blouse at a family rope, and held it, and waited for her to return it, because between these two, the order of things was not about the star on his collar. It was about what she had done on a rooftop 9 years ago, and what that meant to men who knew. Staff Sergeant Boyd's hand was still on her arm. "Attention on deck!" Sergeant Major Holt's voice came across the parade deck like a blade, and the effect was instantaneous and total. The formation snapped. The drill instructor snapped. Every Marine in earshot, from the newest graduate to the oldest gunny, came to rigid attention, and the families fell silent in a spreading wave as they realized something enormous was happening, and they did not know what. Boyd, hand half raised toward the woman's arm, froze with everyone else, caught between motions, his body obeying a command his mind had not caught up to. Susie Stahl raised her right hand and returned the general's salute, crisp and unhurried, and the two of them held it for one long beat in the sudden silence, and then dropped together. "General Falk," she said, "good to see you. I was hoping to keep a low profile today. It's my son's graduation." "I understand completely, Colonel." Falk's eyes moved, slowly, to the hand still hovering near her arm, then up to the face of the man it belonged to. "Though it appears your low profile ran into some difficulty." Hadley arrived at a dead stop beside Boyd, and in his hand was a folder. Boyd's folder, his record, his cherished orders, pulled from the series office when Holt had sent word ahead. He opened it and held it out, and his voice was low and hard, and meant for one man only. "These are your orders, Staff Sergeant," Hadley said. "The ones you've been bragging about all morning. Assessment and selection. Read the bottom line. Read who you report to." Boyd's eyes went down to the page. His mouth moved before the sound came. "Commanding Officer," he read. "Lieutenant Colonel S. Stahl." "Susie Stahl," the woman said quietly. She was looking at him now with no anger in her face at all, which was somehow worse than anger. "That's me, Staff Sergeant. I command the battalion you're trying so hard to join. I'll see you at assessment, if you make it that far. And if you do, you and I are going to have a long talk about what kind of person belongs in something like that. It's your whole job to know, you told me. It's mine, too." The blood went out of Boyd's face in a single drop, the way water goes out of a tipped glass. And then his face did the thing, the slow, helpless cycle that every man does when the floor goes out from under him. Confusion first. This is wrong. This is a mistake. The nobody at the rope cannot be the name on the page. Then disbelief, his eyes flicking from the orders to her wrist, to the general, to the silent saluting deck, hunting for the version of this, where he is not standing where he is standing. Then recognition, cold and total. The understanding arriving all at once. The dagger, the words, the calm that would not break. The woman who had let him dig and dig and dig because the day belonged to her son and not to his ruin. And then horror, plain and absolute, as he understood that he had mocked, blocked, and laid hands on the one human being on earth who held the door he had bragged his whole career toward, and that she had watched him do every bit of it. He understood, finally, the size of what he had done. It was not only that he had been rude to the wrong person, it was that every single thing he had said to her, he had said, while believing it was true. That there were people who belonged and people who did not. That he could tell which was which at a glance, that being quiet meant nobody had noticed you yet. He had said all of it to a woman who had held a rooftop alone so 8 men could cross a street. And she had let him say it. And the letting was the worst part, because it meant she had measured him in the first 30 seconds and found him small enough to indulge. The nobody had been him. It had been him the entire time. The parade deck stood silent and rigid in the bright morning, hundreds of Marines at attention, and the only thing still moving on the whole vast deck was Staff Sergeant Travis Boyd, who had begun, very slightly, to shake. The reckoning came without theater, the way real ones do. Sergeant Major Holt and Gunnery Sergeant Hadley took Boyd off the line before the pass and review had even finished. They did it quietly, professionally. 2 senior men closing on a junior one and walking him to the side, because whatever Boyd had done, he was not going to be allowed to turn a graduation into a spectacle. His recruits, his new Marines, did not see most of it. They were busy becoming Marines. That was as it should be. "You put hands on a Marine officer at her son's graduation, Staff Sergeant," Holt said, low, when they had him aside. "Not just an officer, a battalion commander, a Navy Cross recipient. You laid hands on a woman who held a rooftop alone so her whole team could come home, and you did it to keep her from watching her boy cross a deck. Stand fast, square yourself away, and pray that she is a better person than you have shown yourself to be today, because right now, your entire career is sitting in the palm of her hand." Boyd said nothing. There was nothing to say. He stood fast and squared himself away and waited to find out if he had anything left. Brigadier General Falk turned to Stahl. The salutes were done. The deck was easing back toward the ceremony, the families beginning to breathe and murmur again, and the general lowered his voice to a thing meant for the 2 of them. "Colonel, your call. He's yours in every sense. He reports to you, and what happens to him here happens because you say so. I can have him relieved of duty and run up the chain by this afternoon. Stolen valor laws don't fit, but conduct unbecoming and assault on a commissioned officer fit just fine. Say the word, and that young man never sees the inside of your selection course. Say the word, and he never sees the inside of the Corps. Some warriors carry the right to ruin a man and never once reach for it. Honor the quiet ones who could and don't, and subscribe to the veteran vault, so the next forgotten legend story finds the people who need it." Susie Stahl watched Boyd stand at the side of the deck with the morning light on his white face, and she was quiet for a moment, and the whole thing balanced on what she would say next. "No," she said. "Don't end him." Falk waited. "He's a good Marine who forgot himself today," she said. "I watched him handle that crowd before he ever got to me. He's squared away. He's got a presence. His recruits respect him. The rot isn't all the way through. It's just that nobody's ever made him stand still long enough to learn what he doesn't know." She paused. "Don't take the door away from him, General. Make him earn it. Make him show up to my assessment and selection and find out exactly how hard that door is, with me on the other side of it, knowing precisely who he is. And if he's got it in him to become one of the quiet ones, really become one, then somewhere in the middle of the worst week of his life, he's going to remember a woman in a red blouse he called a nobody, and he's going to understand what the word actually costs. That's worth more than ending him. Let him learn it on his feet. Falk looked at her for a long moment, and then he almost smiled. "The regiment didn't make you up after all, did it?" he said. "All right, Colonel. Your battalion, your call. He'll be there, and he'll know you're waiting." Out on the deck, the ceremony came to its close. The class was reported, the remarks were made, and the senior drill instructors gave the order that turned a formation of recruits, finally and forever, into a formation of Marines. The roar that went up from the families shook the morning, and in the middle of it, a 19-year-old in dress blues broke from the dispersing ranks and went hunting through the crowd for one face and found it. "Mom!" Owen Stahl came through the crowd, grinning so wide it looked like it hurt. "Mom, did you see me? Did you see me out there?" "Every step," she said, and caught him and held him. This boy who had no idea what had just happened 30 feet from where he marched. Every single step. I have never been prouder of anybody in my life, Owen. Not anybody. He pulled back, still grinning. There was like a whole thing with a general over here. Everybody was talking about it. Did you see that? "I think I missed it," she said. "I was watching you." And that was the truth. And it was the only truth that had ever mattered to her on that deck. The general, the salute, the boy gone white at the rope. All of it could have happened on the far side of the moon for all the room it took up in her that morning. She had crossed a country and stood at a rope and swallowed an hour of a young man's contempt for exactly one reason. And the reason was now standing in front of her in dress blues with a grin too big for his face, alive and whole, and hers, a Marine. Everything else was just weather. Weeks later, when the noise was long gone, Susie Stahl stood at a wall of cut stone where the names of the ones who did not come home are carved in long, quiet rows, and she laid her hand on one of them, Mateo Rios. She traced the letters once, the way she had 100 times, the way she would 100 more. A few feet behind her, hands folded, head bowed, stood Staff Sergeant Travis Boyd. He had asked to come. He had not said much. He stood a respectful pace behind the woman he had called a nobody and looked at the name under her hand and said nothing, because somewhere between the parade deck and this wall, he had finally learned that there was nothing to say, that some debts are not paid with words, and some people carry weights you will never see, and the quietest person in any room is very often the one who has carried the most. She traced the letters once more and let her hand fall, and stood with the stillness of someone who had made peace with what she could not change, and had decided, a long time ago, to carry it gently. Some warriors fade quietly into the years, but the valor never leaves them. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault for more.